If you've been following the gaming space for the past few weeks, you might have seen Unity's changes to their pricing model. Here's an article about it from The Verge from earlier this month in September. Uh, I won't go over all the details, but the long and short of it is that Unity planned to charge developers based on the number of game installs, as opposed to just a percentage of their revenue. And understandably, people were really pissed about this, mostly because, well, there were several reasons actually. One of them is that for many developers, this is simply not financially sustainable. They just don't have the revenue per install to be able to pay fees like this. Uh, and there are other issues like what happens if the game was pirated? Does that count toward the installs? Unity answered some of these questions on Twitter, or sorry, on X, as it's called now. So basically, they said that they can adjust the prices pretty much however they want. So if you develop a game with Unity, then you don't know exactly what your costs are going to be long term, because they might just change it at any time. And in terms of how they actually track installs, they have their own proprietary data model that can track that. So not only are they putting a lot of tracking into Unity projects, but they're also pretty much unilaterally deciding on what this number of installs is. So again, with game developers, if Unity says that you have a certain number of installs, then it looked like you didn't really have any option to dispute that, and you just have to agree and say, okay, well, I guess that's how much I have to pay you now. And of course, another problem with this is piracy, because pirated games apparently counted towards this number. So, as a game developer, if your game was downloaded illegally, if someone downloaded it without paying for it when they should have, that actually costs you money. You'd have to pay Unity for that. Of course, they're saying you can reach out to them if you've been a victim of piracy, so that you're not unfairly hurt by the unwanted installs. But that's not a guarantee of anything, right? They say that, but of course they're going to ask for some kind of evidence, and it's just not a good idea to have to be completely dependent on Unity to make these kinds of decisions unilaterally, because as a game developer, you'd have absolutely no control over that. And the good thing is, they actually posted an update last week where they basically went back on this policy to a large extent because they realized just how horrible this is for their company. I mean, the stock price absolutely tumbled. Many game developers ended up signing letters to Unity telling them that this is completely unacceptable and that they would not be using Unity in the future. And it's just overall a very bad look for them. They went from being, somewhat well respected, I suppose, among the game development community to being absolutely terrible. Like, after this incident, if anyone asks what engine should I use, no one is going to say Unity anymore, just because it's such a big risk. Once you pull a move like this, it completely alienates your customers because they just lose trust in you. If they could unilaterally change the terms of service like this, where suddenly you owe them a bunch of money, well, then how are you expected to, you know, trust them with your business, with your livelihood, with what it is that you do? Some game developers made the most out of this situation. Relogic, for instance, the developers of Terraria, have announced that they will be donating $100,000 to each of these game engines, to Godot, to FNA, and additionally pledging $1,000 a month for each of them for the foreseeable future. It's nice to see game developers supporting each other like this in the wake of these changes that would harm game developers so much. So this revamped version, they made some changes to it. So here are the main updates. There is no longer a requirement for the splash screen. I believe this was actually included in the original update, that was kind of one of the benefits that they were saying is, oh, okay, well, now you don't need to put the Unity splash screen in your game if you're using this, if you're using our product. Which, okay, I mean, fair enough. I guess that is a benefit to game developers, although I wouldn't say that that's something that's, critical. Another update that they made is that the runtime fee is no longer retroactively applied to games that you've already made, which for the original, the one that they posted, was absolutely ridiculous. So the way that it worked, at least the way that I understood it, and the internet seemed to understand it, is that fee would apply to any projects made with Unity, including those that were made in the past and were already published. Which is why game developers were so upset about it, is because they made this thing and they chose that engine under a certain set of assumptions about how the fees would be charged, right? Like, that's part of the agreement. They looked over the terms and said, okay, the fees for this are acceptable, so let's use this for our project. But then suddenly they went back and said, nope, anything you've already made, we will be charging you extra money for. Now, they have reverted that change, so it will only be applied to future projects made with Unity. So instead of developers jumping ship from Unity with their existing projects, now they'll only lose future developers. But, I guess that's an improvement in some ways. To make sure that people understand that it'll be that way in the future, they made it so that the terms for each editor version will remain the same. So they can't just retroactively change the terms for using a certain version of Unity, which I guess they legally had the right to do because, you sign the terms of service and the EULA and all that stuff, right? But they've informally committed to not doing that anymore. And the last main update is that the runtime fee will now be self-reported. So they will, I guess, no longer be using a proprietary data-driven model to figure out how many installs you have, and will instead just ask the developers, hey, what are your numbers? And can you, please tell us so that you can then pay us, which is certainly better for the developers, but as a business, that seems like a very strange way of doing things. I guess for the larger studios, right, it's not like they will have any kind of it's not like they will try to, lie about their numbers or anything like that. But for smaller developers, this just seems like a very strange way of tracking things, just because if you've published on, say, a few different platforms, if you released it on like itch.io or something, where you just straight up have a page where it's available for free to download, as a small developer, you probably don't have the infrastructure set up to accurately track that sort of information. And so you kind of have to be careful that the number you're reporting is actually correct, because what if Unity says, no, actually, we think you have more? Like, what evidence would you have to counter that claim? And the last change to this is it will be the fee that Unity will charge is now the minimum of the previous 2.5% of the revenue, and the amount, the new structure, which is based on installs. So now it's, in theory, better than it was before, because in some cases you might be charged less. But of course, being charged slightly less doesn't really matter much when you've completely just lost the trust of your customers like this. So to try to make this a little bit more personal, more relatable, this guy, Mark Whitten, I guess he's, I don't know, the CEO of Unity or something. I actually have no idea. He's the president, okay. But he wrote this open letter to the community, pretty much apologizing. And it's a great corporate apology when it starts with, I'm sorry.
We are deeply sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry. We're sorry.
And then he goes on and just outlines the changes that are made, which is, it's better than it was before. But like I said, once you've lost that community trust, it's very difficult to get back. Um, Almost to the point that this has done irreparable damage to Unity. Like, if I were starting a new project, I would not want to use Unity at all. I mean, there are plenty of great engines available, right? Like, for something that's AAA commercial, very large, Unreal is an excellent choice. For something smaller, or if you're more interested in open source, you've got Godot. That's a fantastic engine. At this point, I don't really see any reason to use Unity over Godot, um, especially since you know that Godot is open source and they won't charge any fees ever, just because of the way that it's licensed, right? Because it's open source, you can just build the engine yourself, and then you don't need to charge yourself anything, right? Like it's literally impossible for them to charge a fee even if they wanted to, right? For, well, at least for the products that are produced with the engine, that is, the games. Another fun aspect to this story is that Unity's president sold quite a few shares right before this announcement. So here is an article from Yahoo Finance about how the president sold 2,000 shares of the company on September 6th. And remember, the announcement was made on September 12th, so this is about a week before then. Now, if we look at the insider trades here, we can see that there were pretty much no buys across this time period, and quite a few sells. Now, I wouldn't say that this spike here is particularly damning. I mean, we can see that there has been a long history of selling off shares, but it still doesn't look great for the company. I mean, if you look at the article here, they say that the price that the stock market thinks that Unity is worth is much lower than it really should be worth. So it seems like the insiders know something that the rest of us don't. So, as this article mentions, the lack of any insider buys and many insider sells is potentially a red flag. That doesn't necessarily mean that something fishy is going on. The insiders, they might just have too much and they need to, convert it to cash for whatever reason. That doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the company. But it is a red flag. It does kind of look suspicious, especially given that the announcement was made, and then right before then we see this big batch of sells. So at best, it's suspicious, and at worst, it's as if they were selling in anticipation of this announcement going poorly. But we'll see where it goes from here. The community is very much unhappy, and it seems like Unity's reputation is permanently in the mud. And now I'll leave you with a slideshow of some memes and reactions to the original announcement. Thank you.